name is Amal and my TOK presentation will be about ethics and the arts. Okay, so there's almost nobody at this point who hasn't heard about the Miley Cyrus VMA scandal. And so in brief summation, basically Miley shocked the world by performing at the 2013 VMAs by dancing provocatively, sticking her tongue out, and displayed a move that has made her infamous, the twerk. And while most people responded with shock, the reactions to Miley's little escapade has basically ranged from indifference to complete disgust and abhorrence. And an interesting thing about the whole situation is that the amount of critics who've come down on her performance, saying that it was distasteful and disgusting. But however, Miley responded to these criticisms by saying that these people who criticize her are hypocrites. That she's not exactly the first performer to dance on stage in very little clothing, as shown by Lady Gaga, who on that same night danced in what could be argued as even less clothing. And so a common word being thrown around with this whole situation was hypocrisy, and how it was hypocritical to come down on Miley for a variety of reasons. One, that she was performing with Robin Thicke, as shown here, but he himself received very little criticism from the performance. And again, in terms of her dressing, it's not like she's the first performer who's ever dressed in like a bikini top, for example. And also, for example, a few months later, a lot of you probably have seen at least snippets of Beyonce's visual album. And you could even argue that she was dancing even more risque and provocatively than Miley was in this video, and was dressed similarly. And for some reason, Beyonce was praised for her performance. And a lot of people loved the performance that she put on. So this idea of hypocrisy ties in with the desire for consistency and moral reasoning. How you can't say something is wrong, but then how you can say something is wrong, but then have certain exceptions to how wrong this is. So basically, that ties into my knowledge issue, which is what is the role of consistency in moral reasoning? And so to sort of break it down, moral reasoning is the expectation of people to support their values and judgments with reasons, and ethics requires consistency so that our moral standards, values are not contradictory. So this can be observed in many areas, but the area that I'll be observing today is the arts. So what better way to look at the arts than to visit an art museum? Let's go in. Can you go next slide, please? So you walk into an art museum and you're immediately surrounded by a lot of beautiful paintings by Monet, Picasso, Dali, Da Vinci, sculptures with fine detail and delicate structure, and everyone's in awe. It's so beautiful. And then you walk in and you come across one exhibit. This exhibit is called, and it's a real exhibit, called Exposition Number 1, and it dated back to 2007 in Nicaragua. And for this exhibition, the artist, Guillermo Vargas, tied an emaciated dog to a wall. And on the wall, in dog food, he wrote, "You are what you read." And it was this dog was left there for 3 days during the exhibition. And the artist, after the 3 days actually, the dog died. And the artist argued, because he came, basically, a lot of people came to the artist and said, this is animal abuse, this is horrible, this is not art, this is awful, this isn't expressing anything. And the artist argued that people who saw the piece didn't intervene by feeding the dog, releasing the dog, helping the dog in any way. And so he pointed out the hypocrisy, and also to extend upon that idea, how nobody helps stranded dogs on the streets. So this is, and then you walk in, and there's another art piece, with the name shown here, I'm not going to say it. And it was taken in 1989 by Andres Serrano. And it was basically a photograph of a plastic crucifix in a jar of the artist's urine. And the artist received death threats and hate mail for years after unveiling this photograph in an art museum. And the piece was actually vandalized almost immediately afterwards, beyond repair, by a group of Christian fundamentalists armed with hammers. And so the artist's response to this was that at the time I made this, I wasn't trying to get anything across. In hindsight, it's a reflection of my work, not only as an artist, but as a Christian. So basically, he was standing by his decision, his artistic decision to make this, calling himself an artist, calling this his form of expression of his own religion, his beliefs. And then you're walking through the art museum and you come across this final painting. This painting is called How Do You Like Me Now? And it's basically a whitewashed portrayal of Jesse Jackson. And what had happened to this piece was that black youths interpreted it as being demeaning and racist. So they tore it down, and beat it with sledgehammers. And after the vandalism, the artist spoke and wrote, "Sometimes art provokes, sometimes it angers. That is a measure of its success. Sometimes it inspires creativity. Maybe the sledgehammer should have been on display too." So basically, in summation, art has commonly been called the language of emotion. So due to its nature of evoking emotion through the interpretation of art, as well as your perception of the artist's intention. So sometimes we just don't understand the art until it is explained to us. However, in the cases of these three controversial artworks, it's almost as though the art that provokes emotions such as disgust or anger is seen as less valuable art, offensive to the point where it can't even be considered art at all. And this is a sort of moral inconsistency in the fact that how come some art that evokes certain emotions can't be considered art because it just makes someone uncomfortable. And so if artists are allowed to make art that makes people feel good and makes people enjoy the work, shouldn't they be allowed to make art that makes them feel just a different feeling? And so art is not the only area of knowledge that holds these sort of moral inconsistencies. So for example, back where I come from, Somalia, when I visited there, I found a lot of moral inconsistencies of the way people lived. And I basically tie this back to a whole generational gap. So one of the examples was that in Somalia, as well as many other places, there are a lot of people who smoke. And it's just, but one interesting thing I found when I was there was that people who smoke were never women. And I asked my mother this, and she told me that women who smoke in that country are seen as being disgusting, and it's immoral, and it's not right, and it's not there. It's a disgusting vice when it's on women, but not when it's on men. And personally, I saw this as an inconsistency in moral beliefs because I saw, okay, so if everyone's allowed to smoke, you can't have the exception of a certain gender not being allowed to smoke, and you can't perceive it as being disgusting. However, you can't, you can't see this as an inconsistency. It can be seen as an inconsistency in my own moral reasoning, but the same can't be argued in the people who live there, the older generations. In their perception, it's not a matter of everyone can smoke except women. It's a matter of it's immoral for women to smoke. So it's a completely different perception. It's a completely different way to look at it. And so in order to better understand it, I could look deeper and to say that in terms of the artwork, some people find no link between the aesthetic and the moral. So basically being morally reprehensible does not deny an artwork its art status. So it does not cease having artistic quality and artistic value if you don't find the artwork decent. So to be consistent, we must apply the same moral standards to one situation that we apply to another unless that we can show the situation is different in a relevant way. So looking back at the whole Miley Cyrus performance, is this an exception to the rule? Is this performance so groundbreakingly shocking that it deserves to be assessed on a completely different field of judgment? Is it so out there that you can argue that this is a whole different sort of amorality? Like it's not on par with Lady Gaga's performance or Beyonce's performance because who she is, what she did was so shocking that it's a completely different perspective. And the same with the three arts. Are they so shocking that they don't deserve to be displayed alongside other artworks? Or are they just plain offensive or racist or sexist in any way? And so like I mentioned before, there's a lot of factors that affect one's moral reasoning. So basically, it depends on whose perspective you're looking at. For example, in the perspective of the younger generation who grew up with like Hannah Montana and the whole career that she had, and then the drastic change she took from that to the VMAs, I guess from that perception, then she can't be seen in the same level field as people who have built their careers from always being a little bit more provocative, such as Lady Gaga. So, and then the same thing with my whole Somali generation and family. I can't compare my moral reasoning to the same moral reasoning that my grandmother has, because we have completely different reasonings, therefore completely different views on these inconsistencies. It's an inconsistency to me, but it's not necessarily an inconsistency to someone else. So like I mentioned before, there's a lot of factors that affect your moral reasoning, like according to moral relativism, our values are decided by the conditions in which we grew up. And so our family life, peers, location all have an effect on our own self-perception and how we perceive different things that we see and hear. So that's basically
questions? I'll ask mine. So as for your conclusion, in your conclusion, you basically took the approach of moral relativism, right?
Yeah.
Because looking at this generational gap, like you said, insofar as it applies to the arts, what would be your perspective in looking at a different area of knowledge? Would it remain the same or would it change? Like history or natural sciences?
I actually kind of looked at a similar topic in my essay. So basically, for history, it was seen as a little bit dangerous to like look at historical information in the perspective of moral relativism, because if you look at certain events from a personal perspective, you can alter how, not only how you see it, but then how you perceive it, and then how you express this information to other people. So I wouldn't argue the same, for example, in history than I would in art, because art is a more personal area of knowledge. Like, it has more to do with the individual, but history in a lot of ways has to do with like an overall view of humanity. So.
One more question from the audience? Okay, thank you very much.